Hello and welcome to The Comic Cave. I'm Ramsey, aka Captain Away, and today we're looking at the 1982 graphic novel, The New Mutants, from Marvel Comics. With the arrival of the new X-Men and Chris Claremont, the Uncanny X-Men became one of the best-selling comic books of all time. As any company would, Marvel wished to ride that success as far as they could push it. Ironically enough, this era began with basically a rejection of the idea of having two X-Men teams, as the characters comprising the first X-Men team decided to retire back to quiet civilian lives after the replacements had been brought together. No need for so many X-Men around! But the formation of another team was basically inevitable, and it wouldn't be long before we would see plenty of that going on, like the formation of X-Factor, a completely separate team of mutant heroes made up of all the characters from X-Men number 1. Or the actual X-Men splitting off into blue and gold variants in 2 titles running concurrently, and on from there. But before any of that happened, Marvel pushed for the creation of a young team of mutant heroes to be a new generation of students at Xavier's school. Something that could be a cross between the stories of the first X-Men run and the revamp started in Giant Size X-Men. And that team would be the New Mutants, a team that needs no further introduction, because with but one exception, that introduction is what this story is about. So let's learn who these intrepid youths are and take this away. The comic opens on a werewolf attack, better watch your back. Yeah, I don't know what that was. Sorry. We find ourselves in Scotland with Dr. Moira McTaggart as the human under attack here. Moira is one of the longest standing X-Men allies and side characters, even already by this point. She first appeared in X-Men 96, hired on to be the housekeeper at the X-Men mansion. But it wouldn't be long before she was revealed to have a secret past with Charles Xavier, and was actually a brilliant scientist and head of a research institute on mutants based in Scotland. Because she's Scottish, the daughter of a Scottish lord even, and was never ever at any point an American CIA agent. Just saying, for no reason. I'm not bitter or anything. The werewolf in question here is actually a 14-year-old Scottish girl named Rain Sinclair. Though later I think her age will be retconned down to 13, but I don't have the receipts to prove it, so maybe I'm just confused. Rain is on the run from a mob of angry villagers that fell straight out of a Hammer horror film, complete with pitchforks and torches. Yeah, it's 1982, Claremont. I'm pretty sure people had electric flashlights by this point. The mob is led by future recurring character Reverend Craig, who is convinced that Rain has the devil in her. But Moira knows it's just mutation, not demons, no matter what Craig or Stryker might say. And so she defends Rain and uses her lordly status to convince the mob to leave. So we move on to Rio de Janiero and a game of soccer. I'm gonna assume those are just typos that the editor didn't catch. Here, a young man named Roberto da Costa is the star player in a match against Yelena Belova's childhood soccer team. And I guess that's a good thing given the Thunderbolts' win rate. And that opposing team doesn't like Roberto because of his mixed heritage. And they ain't talking about him being a mutant. Skin color prejudice. That's so pathetic, it's almost quaint. Though Roberto doesn't think it's quaint and lashes out at his bullies, only to have his attempt to stand up for himself quickly turn into a beating. But that's when Roberto's mutation triggers and he suddenly becomes a shadow, with dark spots floating in the air around him. This in turn triggers a panic, and everyone in the stadium runs for their lives, from the terrified child who is clearly just such a threat. Everyone except for Juliana, Roberto's girlfriend, who somehow manages to push her way through the crowd and reach Roberto as he returns to normal and collapses exhausted. And as she holds him, we see that they are secretly being observed by a mysterious figure. Dun dun dun. Wow, those are some really very frilly sleeves. But before we get to that, let's go to coal country Kentucky, where we meet 16-year-old Sam Guthrie, who is giving up college plans to begin work at the local coal mine after his father died in those same mines. but Sam's got a big family, and somebody's gotta support them. But Sam soon finds himself in a cave-in, and one of his father's friends is trapped under the falling rubble. Sam's hero instincts kick in, and the minor refuses to leave the minor behind. Get it? Minor? I'm a genius. Things start to look hopeless, but suddenly Sam goes rocketing out of the mountain, carrying his dad's friend with him. And within moments, they find themselves outside and safe. Unsure of how they got there, but happy to be alive. Unfortunately, it seems Sammy Boy is also being watched by Frilly Sleeves. But we have one more introduction before getting to him. We next find ourselves in Colorado, meeting Danielle Moonstar and her grandfather Black Eagle. Black Eagle wants to send Moonstar away to continue her education, to Charles Xavier in New York, because he's aware of her mutation and not sure how to continue instructing her. Moonstar's not at all happy about being sent to a white man to continue her education, echoing similar feelings from when Thunderbird met Xavier in Giant Size X-Men. But she's not going to have much of a choice, because later that night, she finds her grandfather dead, murdered by mysterious assailants. And those assailants work for our frilly watcher, who turns out to be none other than Donald Pierce. Remember him? No? Pierce was a member of the Hellfire Club's inner circle, the ones responsible for messing with Jean Grey and trying to turn her into their Black Queen during the Dark Phoenix saga, where it was also revealed that Pierce was a cyborg. Now Pierce, acting on his own, has captured Tessa, another member of the inner circle, and has set his sights on destroying New Mutants as their powers begin to manifest. That brings us, finally, to Charles Xavier. At his school for gifted youngsters, Charlie is currently running an exam on Xian Kuiman, a young Vietnamese woman with a Chinese name, who is our only new mutant to have existed before this story. She first appeared in Marvel Team-Up number 100, where Spider-Man and the Fantastic Four helped her rescue her younger siblings from her evil uncle and her twisted twin brother. Karma has the ability to possess people, effectively shutting down their brains while she takes full control over their mind and bodies. Now she's being studied by Xavier and Moira, who has arrived with Rain in tow so that Xavier can teach them to control their powers. At least that's the idea. But Xavier isn't sure he wants to, as he believes the ultimate outcome of his students is their inevitable deaths. As currently, he believes the X-Men to be dead after they were taken into space by the Brood in a recent issue of X-Men. And a repeat of something that had happened literally like 30 issues earlier, but you know, it's fine. But Moira convinces him to give teaching another try, and just in time, as the letter from Black Eagle arrives right then, requesting Xavier's assistance with Moonstar. But when their group arrives out west to pick up Moonstar, they find Black Eagle already dead, and find themselves under attack first by Moonstar, who has the mutant ability to show them illusions of their greatest fears, in this case, Xian's fear of being back in Vietnam during the war, this was 82, remember, and then attacked by some actual armored assailants working for Pierce. Moonstar manages to stop one of their attackers all on her own, and Professor X is able to read the soldier's mind to discern Pierce's plan for mutant extermination, starting in Rio with Roberto and in Kentucky with Sam. So they then make the Scooby-Doo mistake of splitting up, gang. Moira, Moonstar, and Xian, breaking the name pattern, head to Brazil to track down Roberto. This unexpectedly gets them in trouble with the local police, because it turns out Juliana has been kidnapped by some soldiers from the Hellfire Club. Roberto attempts to rescue his girlfriend on his own, but his powers give out on him before he can do much. We do learn here that Roberto is also 14 years old, but he definitely is retconned down to 13 by issue 2 of the ongoing series, which confirms Rain's age as 14, Sam's age as 16, and Karma's age as 19. So, I do have those receipts. Do with that what you will. Luckily for Roberto, while Moira distracted the cops, Moonstar and Karma tracked down Roberto and followed him. So Moonstar is able to use her Fear Mirage powers to distract the bad guys with a vision of Wolverine, who's diving at them like he's in mid-ult. That is pretty scary. This actually is a reference to the Dark Phoenix saga, seeming to confirm that these three are among the same men we saw Wolverine tear to absolute shreds in what is definitely my favorite part of that entire story arc. The kids have a surprisingly easy time defeating these soldiers, but one of them does open fire on them, and in a desperate attempt to save his life, Juliana bravely sacrifices herself and jumps in front of Roberto to take a bullet for him. With that, we join Xavier and Rain in Kentucky, where they are suddenly attacked by Sam Guthrie, who is now being called Cannonball and is allied with Pierce. Guess his machine doesn't kill fascists. Cannonball manages to knock out Xavier with his surprise attack, but Rain shifts into wolf form and gets away. Unaware of her powers, the villains lose track of her, and she's able to follow their scent to a compound, where we learn that she has a third form that's half human and half wolf, that gives her all the advantages of both. And at this point, it's shown that the other team has somehow already arrived at this location. I'm pretty unclear on how it took less time for them to go from Colorado to Rio, do everything they did down there, and then get back to Kentucky in the time that it just took Xavier and Rain to go from Colorado to Kentucky. Maybe those two walked the whole way? However it happened, and however they knew to show up at this specific location, the kids now team up to break into the complex in an effort to free Xavier. While the cybernetically enhanced adult henchmen trained to fight mutants still prove to be no challenge whatsoever for the team of literal children, Pierce, as the big bad, is another story. He knocks out Rain, proves resistant to Moonstar's manipulations, and knocks out Karma with a blast of energy. He's also saved from Roberto's attack by Cannonball, but when Pierce demands Cannonball kill the children, Sam refuses. So Pierce decides to take matters into his own hands and kill the kids himself. Fortunately, a barely conscious Rain manages to turn off Pierce's machine that had been blocking Xavier's mutant powers, and a silent battle of wills begins between the two men that ends with Xavier taking over Pierce's mind. With that, the fight is over. Tessa offers to take Pierce back to the Hellfire Club so that they can take care of their own, as she puts it, promising that the X-Men have seen the last of Donald Pierce, which is an out-and-out lie. Liar! Sam wonders what will happen to him now that he's no longer in Pierce's employ, and Roberto tells him to get lost with his boss as Xavier and the other kids leave. We then jump back to the X-Mansion, where we get a nice little nod to the very first issue of X-Men. And not just in that Xavier is looking at these nice little framed photos of the two X-Men teams, but also in the call he puts out and panel layout mimicking the first page of that issue. And in the fact that the students are wearing the classic X-Men uniforms. Rain notes that the uniform disappears when she changes into wolf form and reappears when she changes back. Also, notably, Roberto has a picture of Wolverine on his wall. Me too, kid. Me too. Moonstar also decides to buck X-Men tradition a little with her own unique belt and boots, and Xavier decides he'd rather not suppress their individual identities. He also surprises everyone with a guest. He's invited Sam Guthrie to the school as well. And with a little reluctance, the teens decide to accept their former enemy into their ranks, while Xavier looks on approvingly. Or just creepily. I can't decide which. Not gonna lie, definitely feels more creepy than anything else to me. And I think I'll leave you with that as we get to the breakdown. To be honest, I was never sold on the New Mutants. While I actually like a lot of these characters, it's mostly for their appearances outside of this series, like Rain Sinclair as Wolfsbane in X Factor. I also like Magic, but she doesn't join the team for a while. And fittingly, I don't think this origin story is much to write home about. As I've said a couple times, it very much attempts to recreate the magic of giant-sized X-Men by jumping around the world to gather together a multiracial, multi-nationality group of heroes. But its slower pace and lack of immediate danger make for a much less appealing story. Also, the recurring problem I tend to have with books focusing on younger X-Men, and how the villains become a lot more hilariously inept because they have to be able to be defeated by little kids. It doesn't help any that I'm very much not a fan of the watercolor-looking art for the issue, which I don't think mixes well with Bob McLeod's pencils. Not to say that there's nothing that this comic does well. I like that they don't actually focus on giving everyone codenames for this first story. Outside of Karma, who already had a codename, and Cannonball, the rest are just referred to by their names. And while I may not like this particular story, you can definitely sense that there's a lot that can be done with these characters, so it does have some appeal going forward. So I'm giving this graphic novel a recommendation level of medium. What we have here is an unfortunately unremarkable origin for a mostly unremarkable team that does eventually lead to a better series, but we've got some time before we actually get there. The collected edition gets 1. Werewolf Attack! Which I guess we're saying is okay? I just think it's kind of fun. For this review, I used the New Mutants Classic Collection, which collects this graphic novel, the first 7 issues of the New Mutants series, and Uncanny X-Men number 167, which is an important crossover issue. So while that's not a bad number of comics, there are no special features in the collection of any kind, unfortunately. There is a New Mutants Epic Collection, which I'm sure is a much better collection to get. Thanks everybody for watching, and I hope you enjoyed this video. That's all from the X-Men for now. Next we'll move on to some big Marvel event comics, but don't worry, I'll also try and tackle some New 52 comics later this year, for those of you patiently waiting for me to get back to that. So if you did enjoy this video, or you're looking forward to any of that, or you're just part of a next generation of heroes, then be sure to click the like and subscribe and all those things so you can help the channel out, and so you can help yourself to be sure to be here next time, and I hope to see you then, right here, in the Comic Cave.